Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more the executive branch of the United States. Last episode, we talked about Jefferson coming into office and who Jefferson was. Let's go ahead and look at some of the information that who would be in the cabinet and some other things. Now, in the Adams administration, remember, Adams president, Jefferson vice president, we had Timothy Pickering, and then John Marshall as Secretary of States. And then as Secretary of Treasury, Walcott, and then Dexter for a short time. And Secretary of War, McHenry, and Dexter also would be Secretary of War for a short time. Finally, we would have as Attorney General Charles Lee for the entirety of Adams' time, and we'd have the new position of Secretary of the Navy, in which Benjamin Stoddert was our first Secretary of the Navy. Now, with that said, we have the Jefferson cabinet. Jefferson becomes president. He was the previous vice president. So Adams was only in for one term. Jefferson would fill 2 full terms. For him, he would be the first president ever to have more than one vice president. Aaron Burr for his first term, and then he finished out with George Clinton. And of course, Aaron Burr would be gone because I believe that was at the same point he has the infamous duel with Alexander Hamilton, in which they duel each other and he shoots and kills Hamilton. Now, for Secretary of State, he would have James Madison. Madison himself, let me bring this up. I forgot to bring this up even. Presidency of George. Because George Washington, I think, had Madison in his cabinet, if I remember correctly. Come on, George. There we go. He had Hamilton. No, he didn't have Madison. Okay. But, with that said, Madison himself would be a future president. He was one of the primary writers of the Constitution. We know Jefferson as one of the primary writers for the Declaration of Independence. James Madison would be one of our primary writers for the Constitution. So these were some of the big mental thinkers of, the founding of America. These are truly founding fathers, Madison, Jefferson. But yeah, James Madison would serve as Secretary of State after Adams would have 2. But yeah. Now, Secretary of Treasury. Adams had Walcott followed by Dexter. Jefferson would actually maintain Dexter as Secretary of Treasury for a short period of time before assigning Albert Gallatin, who would be the Secretary of the Treasurer for the remainder of Jefferson's two elections in office. Now, let's look. Adams had James McHenry, followed by Dexter. Jefferson would have a new person altogether who would serve his entirety under Jefferson, much the way Madison would. Henry Dearborn would become our Secretary of War under Thomas Jefferson. Attorney Generals. We had Charles Lee as the Attorney General under John Adams. But under Jefferson, this was probably the most chaotic one because you have 3 Attorney Generals over his 2 terms in office. The original is Levi Lincoln Sr., and then he would be replaced by John Breckinridge, who would only be there for a short period of time, 1805 to 1806, before being replaced with Caesar Augustus Rodney. Breckinridge himself would run for president, so he's not little in the founding of the nation at all. Attorney General had a run for president. I think it was during... Was it during... It was around when John Quincy Adams would become president, followed by... Crap, who is the guy? He's famous for kind of being an asshole when it came to Native Americans. Shit. He's on the $20 bill. It's that president. So it's in that period of time, 6th, 7th president. He would be running in that period of time. I think it was during when Quincy Adams wins, because it was often accused of being part of the corrupt bargain because there were so many different people running and everything. I might be incorrect on that, but he's in that period of time there when he runs for president. But yeah, here he serves as Attorney General. Finally, Secretary of Navy under Jefferson. We have Benjamin Stoddert remains on for a short period of time before being replaced by Robert Smith, who would serve the rest of the period that Jefferson's in there. Rest of the Jefferson administration time, so yeah. And let's pull this up. Because I remember seeing it and I'm like, we need to talk about this. Might have been earlier in the article instead of... Nope, there it is. Okay. As we have talked about before, the way presidents and vice presidents were decided, there would be votes, but the Electoral College, you know, which is still what we use, gives out the votes, and it's who's in first place becomes president, who's in second place becomes vice president. Of course, it's something we no longer do. Jefferson would become president because there was an agreement amongst people there. Some of the main people in government, it's like, look, we'll agree upon Jefferson being president, Burr vice president. But, of course, what happens? Burr gets in his famous duel with Alexander Hamilton. So yeah, I'm trying to see if it'll show it here because I know it mentions the duel. Foreign Affairs, Barbary War, Louisiana Purchase, the Burr Conspiracy. Having been dropped from the 1804 Democratic Republican ticket, so he was even dropped before he dueled with Hamilton. Burr ran for the position of governor in New York. So when they were looking for Jefferson to get reelected, they look, we don't like Burr here, so he would be kicked off the ticket, and Burr would decide, let's run for governor of New York. And since I'm no longer going to be vice president, he would be defeated. Federalist Party leader Alexander Hamilton was a key factor in his defeat, having made callous remarks regarding Burr. Believing that his honor was offended, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. On July 11, 1804, Burr mortally wounded Hamilton in a duel at Weehawken, New Jersey. Burr was indicted for Hamilton's murder in New York and New Jersey, causing him to flee to Georgia, although he remained president of the Senate during Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase's impeachment trial. The two Burr indictments were quietly allowed to die. So yeah, he would be indicted for murder, but would run to Georgia even though he still had a political position of power after his duel with Hamilton, in which Hamilton would die. And since he had no intention of coming back to New York or New Jersey, the indictments would be allowed to die, since they were state indictments. They weren't national indictments or anything. After Burr was disgraced in the duel in 1804 and his own presidential ambitions were ended, he was reported by the British ambassador as wanting to effect a separation of the western part of the United States at the Appalachian Mountains. So yeah, apparently he loses, and they proclaim he gets in touch with Britain wanting to separate territory. It's like, look, we'll join back with y'all and be west of the Appalachian Mountains and give it back to y'all. Jefferson believed that to be true by November of 1806 because Burr had been rumored to be variously plotting with some western states to secede for an independent empire or raise a filibuster to conquer Mexico. At the very least, there were reports of Burr's recruiting men, stocking arms, and building boats. New Orleans seems especially vulnerable, but at some point, the American general there, James Wilkinson, a double agent for the Spanish, decided to turn on Burr. Jefferson issued a proclamation warning that there were U.S. citizens illegally plotting to take over Spanish holdings. Though Burr was nationally discredited, Jefferson feared for the very Union. In a report to Congress in January of 1807, Jefferson declared Burr's guilt placed beyond question. By March of 1807, Burr was arrested in New Orleans and placed on trial for treason in Richmond, Virginia, with Chief Justice John Marshall presiding. If you've watched my history of the Supreme Court, you know John Marshall was our fourth Chief Justice and set a lot of precedents that would stay a part of Supreme Court rituals, I guess. I can't think of the words. I am so lost for words today. I apologize, y'all. But, yeah. Anyway, Chief Justice John Marshall presided. June 13th, Jefferson was subpoenaed by Burr to release documents that favored Burr's defense. Jefferson stated he had no loyalty to Burr and only released a few documents Burr had requested, having invoked executive privilege. Jefferson refused to appear at Burr's trial. The weak government case led to Burr's acquittal, but with his reputation ruined, he was never able to mount another adventure. Burr later died on his Staten Island residence in October of 1836. So he would apparently return to New York, Staten Island. So yeah, eventually. But apparently, yeah, the indictments for murder by New York and New Jersey didn't last too long, and they were just kind of in the wind. So yeah, Aaron Burr, he would be dropped from the ticket. But yeah, the Louisiana Purchase is this big portion of land we pick up here. Because before, we only had this and east to the coast. So suddenly, it's like, look, we have all this more land to settle. And of course, it wasn't really ours to settle. It was already settled. You know, native peoples that lived on it for a long time. But but yeah, it would develop places of Alabama, Mississippi, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, I think. Yeah, because up here is Minnesota. You would get Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, a little bit of Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. This Illinois, this would be Iowa. Yeah, And then over here you would have parts of Montana and Idaho and parts of modern day Colorado, Wyoming. But yeah, at this point though, they were still just open land. We wouldn't have this. This is known as Rupert's Land. And we wouldn't have a lot of the Southwest and West Coast. We wouldn't have Hawaii. We wouldn't have Alaska. Let's see if I can boost this picture up to see what it says. Disputed land between Orleans territory and New Spain is your red here. Disputed between Orleans and West Florida, because West Florida was still not U.S. This little portion of Minnesota, modern day Minnesota, would be disputed between Indiana and Rupert's Land. Here's Rupert's Land. This is Indiana territory, this whole thing. So yeah, disputed between this giant territory and Rupert's Land. They dispute this. And then this is disputed between Massachusetts and the colony of New Brunswick, which is Canadian. So yeah. At this point in time though, the Southwest is Spanish. The Northwest is unclaimed. Hawaiian Islands are still Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. And Russian America, or modern day Alaska, was Russian. So yeah. If there's anything else we want to kind of touch on here, he would get elected in 1801, and then of course he would get elected in 1800 and 1804, which are the two terms. So yeah. Now, George Clinton would replace Burr for the second term, and Federalists, which were John Adams' party. So we already have that clashing of parties in American politics. Washington was the only one to avoid it. Jefferson would not. The Federalists would make attacks on Jefferson and his alleged atheism. Because remember, he has a Bible which he takes out a lot of the miracles. He is a staunch proponent of separation between church and state. They would also attack his support for democratization and an affair that would come to light to be the truth that he had with Sally Hemings, which would become the centerpiece of their campaign, saying that Jefferson's affair with an enslaved woman was hypocritical, giving his continuing support for slavery. So yeah, again, slavery, you can see, is already a big issue. The Democratic Republicans, Jefferson's party, enjoyed the marked advantage in-party organization, while the Federalists and their ethos of government by the elite were becoming increasingly unpopular. Jefferson won every state except for Connecticut and Delaware, taking a great portion of the votes in his re-election in 1804. The election of 1808, Jefferson, who believed that incumbents should not serve indefinitely, because remember, he was still part of the founding fathers who were like, yeah, we don't want kings. And then he was one of the primary writers of the Declaration of Independence, which proclaimed freedom from England. So he followed the recent two-term tradition set by Washington. Washington served 2 terms. Adams was only able to get 1 term. Jefferson served 2 terms and stepped down. So he would decline to seek a 3rd term, and instead he endorsed his advisor and friend and also Secretary of State, James Madison. Madison, of course, would win. So yeah. But that's a look at kind of who the cabinet members were for Jefferson and some more information on how some of the people got in there and stuff. So yeah, Secretary of State James Madison. I think it was then James Monroe, then John Quincy Adams, and I am still frozen on the name of this president who had such bad behavior. He wasn't all bad, but yeah, he showed some really racist attitudes toward Native peoples. He enabled the Trail of Tears to happen. I cannot remember his name though. Again, he's the one on the $20 bill. Shoot! I keep wanting to say Alexander and it's not Alexander! What was his name? I think Van Buren is after him, though. What was his name? Let's go ahead and open this up so I can see who the heck I'm thinking of. Madison, Monroe, John Quincy, Andrew Jackson. That's a stupid ass. I could not think. I was like, what is his name? Van Buren, like I said, is right after him. William Henry Harrison, who would die die shortly after entering office. Proclamation by many that it was because he gave a long oration, a long speech in the rain. Though I think there's contestment to that nowadays, but yeah. John Tyler, Polk, Zachary Taylor, yeah. William Henry Harrison, one of the catchphrases when he was running was Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because he had a nickname as a military leader that he would be called Tippecanoe. I think it was at an actual battle of Tippecanoe. That's what he was kind of known for. And then, of course, and Tyler, too, was John Tyler, his vice president. James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan. He's often considered a horrible president and the one that led us into the war, the Civil War, because, of course, Lincoln took over when, Andrew Johnson was Lincoln's vice president, would serve a term of his own. Well, the rest of Lincoln's term, because Lincoln, I think, actually got one full term and had been elected for a second. I think I may be wrong on this again. I don't want to proclaim I know what I'm talking about, but yeah. They're followed by Ulysses S. Grant, General of the Union during the Civil War, Rutherford B. Hayes. He ends Reconstruction and kind of brings about what would become the era of Jim Crow and segregation and all this. James A. Garfield. So now we're in. That will bring us into the robber baron, the original Gilded era. When you get into James A. Garfield, Chester A. Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Cleveland again. Before Trump, he was the only president to be elected non-consecutively. One term, loses, and then comes back the term after that. Then we have William McKinley, who brings us into the 1900s. But the best thing about him was his vice president, Teddy Roosevelt. Be followed by William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, Warren G. Harding, and his Teapot Dome scandal, Calvin Coolidge, and the man who unfortunately gets saddled with the effects of the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover, and that would bring in the man who served the most terms in office, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He'd be followed by Harry Truman, who would drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. And he would be followed by probably the best recent Republican president there's been, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The rest of them have been jackasses. He would be followed by John F. Kennedy, and him by Lyndon B. Johnson. Unfortunately, we get what was the standard for horrible Republicans, horrible presidents, Richard Nixon. He'd be followed by the only president never to be elected as a president. He would only serve out the rest of Nixon's term, Gerald Ford. And the president who would recently have passed away and was buried, Jimmy Carter, then Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. Yeah, look how old the still living presidents are. Born 46, born 46, born 61, born 46, born 42. Yeah, there's some ancient presidents. Because World War II, 46 is the year after World War II had ended. You're looking at freaking 55 years would bring us into 2000, and then we have 25 years onto that. 55, 25, 60, 80, but you minus 1 because it was 46 instead of 45. So 79 years. 79 years. Obama was at least born in the 60s. My goodness. But it seems like all we want to elect now are old people. Who was the last president before Obama that was born at a decent time? I mean, my goodness. George H.W. Bush was born in 1924. Reagan born in 1911. Hell, Carter was younger than Reagan. He was born in 1924. Gerald Ford in 1913. Richard Nixon in 1913. Lyndon B. Johnson in 1908. Kennedy in 1917. Yeah, they talk about how young he was as a president. He was born in 1917 and served in the 60s, which puts him in his late 40s. Yeah, late 40s. It's known for that he was such a young president. And then we get into presidents born before the 1900s. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Harry S. Truman, Franklin Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, Calvin Coolidge, Warren G. Harding, Woodrow Wilson. So yeah, he was born before the Civil War even started. Howard Taft, Teddy Roosevelt, William McKinley, Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Chester A. Arthur was born in 1829. James A. Garfield was born actually later than him in 1831. Rutherford B. Hayes in 1822. Ulysses Grant, 1822. So he was the main general for the Union Army in the Civil War. That means Rutherford B. Hayes was the same age, pretty much. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808, so he was born during Jefferson's term. Lincoln in 1809, at the end of Jefferson's term. James Buchanan in 1791. Franklin Pierce was a young guy. He was born in 1804 and would serve in 1853 to 1857, so 49 to 53 in years of age. He was a rather young guy for president. Millard Fillmore, born in 1800. Zachary Taylor, born in 1784. James K. Polk, born in 1795. 95, 45. He was in his very early 50s. 1790 to 1841. So, he, again, early 50s. You got a lot early on that are in like their 50s and stuff. So, Tippecanoe. He was of age. Martin Van Buren, Andrew Jackson, 30, 33, 29. So yeah, he was 60s. John Quincy Adams, 33 to 25. 33 and 25, so he was in his late 50s. James Monroe, 58 to 17, 42, 52, 59. So he was late 50s into early 60s when he was president. James Madison, born in 1751, 49 plus 9. He'd be 58 when he became president. Jefferson, let's see, 57 plus 1, so he was in his late 50s. John Adams, 35 to 97, 62. Washington, 32 to 89. He was in his 50s. So 50s and 60s is pretty common. You will get some in the 40s. But yeah, we've been dealing with a lot of really old people as of the last couple, 2 or 3 decades. Anyway, yeah, we'll go ahead and end this episode here. I've allowed it go on for longer than I'm in. I was just looking at the Jefferson presidency, but then I got kind of into watching about looking at the other presidents. Yeah. So there's a look at Jefferson's cabinet and how some of the people got switched in and out. But we'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting links in the description box below the video. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.